So, welcome to the deep dive, everyone. Today we are exploring something that honestly sounds like it's straight out of a science fiction movie.
Yeah, it really does.
Right. But before we get into the crazy tech, I want you to imagine a scenario. You're looking through this tiny camera lens, navigating down into a dark, constantly shifting environment. And then suddenly your monitor just fills with red.
Just completely washes out.
Exactly. You're looking at a profusely bleeding tumor deep inside a patient's gastrointestinal tract. And, well, the patient is crashing right in front of you.
Yeah, it's an endoscopist's worst nightmare, frankly.
I mean, they've just experienced a sudden drop in hemoglobin of like 3 to 4 grams. And for those of you listening who might not be super familiar with those metrics, hemoglobin is that critical protein in your red blood cells.
Right, the oxygen ferries.
Yeah, it ferries oxygen to the brain, to the
Yeah.
organs. So a sudden drop of 4 grams means the body's entire oxygen transport system is basically collapsing. It's a full-blown, terrifying emergency.
And, in a standard trauma scenario, a surgeon would just, they'd open the area up, find the bleeding vessel, and physically clamp it shut.
Right, just grab it.
Or an endoscopist might use thermal cautery, which is essentially applying intense heat to just melt and seal the tissue together.
But the scenario we're looking at today, and we're pulling this directly from our source material, by the way, removes all those standard options.
Yeah, entirely off the table.
Oh, right. I should mention the source. We're looking at excerpts from this really fascinating clinical demonstration on YouTube. It's uploaded by the channel Gautamakula S. Raju, and the video is titled HCC 147530 Hemospray.
It's an incredible video. It gives you this unvarnished, over-the-shoulder look at what a doctor actually does when things get incredibly desperate.
Desperate is the word, because
Yeah.
in this case, the tissue is just too fragile for a metal clip, right? Like
Right.
it would just tear.
Yeah, it would shred right through. And you can't use heat because it'll just provoke worse bleeding.
And most critically, the patient's own blood has entirely lost the ability to clot. So what do doctors do when they absolutely cannot touch the wound and the biology itself is failing?
Well, that's where they bring in Hemospray, which is this highly specialized non-touch powder delivery system.
Wait, non-touch powder? I mean, on the surface, that sounds completely counterintuitive to me. Firing a dry powder at a massive internal hemorrhage sounds like, I don't know, throwing sand at a fire hose.
It does. It sounds like a total mismatch of forces. But to understand why it works, you really have to break down the mechanics of the powder itself. Because this isn't a pharmaceutical drug.
Okay.
It's a completely inert proprietary mineral compound.
Mm-hmm.
So when the endoscopist locates the bleeding lesion, they position this thin medical catheter to hover exactly 1 to 2 centimeters away from the tissue.
So they literally never make physical contact.
Never. From that distance, they just fire this powder directly into the pooling blood.
Which brings us to the physics of the interaction, right? Because this powder is extremely hydrophilic.
Very. It rapidly absorbs liquid.
So the moment these inert granules make contact with the moisture of the blood, they absorb the fluid, instantly swell up, and cross-link with one another.
Yeah, it transforms in a fraction of a second. It goes from this dry dust into a really cohesive structural matrix.
Wait, let me unpack this for a second. So instead of welding a pipe shut with heat or clamping it, this is essentially like firing medical fix-a-flat or magical sand at the leak from a distance.
That is actually a perfect analogy. It creates this rapid-setting microscopic sandbag wall right over the rupture. And the crucial distinction here, and this is so important, is that this barrier is strictly mechanical.
Right.
It is not triggering any sort of chemical reaction in the body.
Yeah, because normally when you get a cut, your body relies on that highly complex biological domino effect, right? The coagulation cascade.
Exactly. Platelets rush in, chemical signals fire off, and a biological clot forms naturally.
But in the high-stakes cases we're talking about, that biological cascade is broken.
Yeah, entirely. The patient might be on dialysis, which severely impairs platelet function. Or they might have circulating platelets, but those platelets are effectively blind and broken.
Like they just won't stick together.
Right. Or the patient might just be on heavy blood thinners.
So a chemical coagulant wouldn't do any good anyway.
None at all.
Yeah.
The Hemospray bypasses the body's broken chemistry entirely.
Yeah.
It doesn't care if your platelets are functioning or not.
Because it's simply doing the physical job of plugging the hole using rapid fluid absorption and mechanical pressure.
Exactly. And by maintaining that hovering distance, that 1 to 2 centimeters, the doctor avoids inflicting any further mechanical trauma on tissue that might already be necrotic or severely inflamed.
Right, from a tumor or something.
Yeah. There's zero heat, zero clamping, zero contact.
But, okay, Anyone listening and visualizing this setup has to be arriving at the same massive logistical nightmare that I am.
The moisture.
The moisture. I mean, the gastrointestinal tract is arguably the wettest, most humid environment in the human body.
Oh, absolutely. It's constantly secreting mucus and acid.
So if this powder is engineered to instantly turn into a cohesive, concrete-like wall the millisecond it touches moisture, how on earth does a doctor push it through 3 feet of medical tubing down a patient's throat or colon without the ambient humidity completely clogging the tube before they even pull the trigger?
Well, the battle against moisture is really the single most tense, difficult, and precarious part of the entire procedure.
I can imagine.
The internal environment of that delivery catheter must remain bone dry.
Bone dry in a wet stomach. Wow. Let's detail the specific gear they use for this because it's highly specialized. From the source video, the doctor uses a through-the-scope catheter, typically either a 7 French or a 10 French size.
Yeah, and just to clarify for everyone, in medical equipment sizing, French is simply a gauge of diameter. 1 French is about 1/3 of a millimeter.
Okay.
So a 10 French catheter, which is the preferred choice if the endoscope channel is wide enough for it, is roughly 3.3 millimeters across.
That's tiny. That's about the thickness of a standard headphone jack.
It is.
It is a really tiny tunnel to be pushing a heavy powder through.
Which is exactly why the 10 French is preferred over the 7. The wider diameter reduces the risk of the powder backing up and clogging. But alongside that catheter, the endoscopist has another completely non-negotiable piece of equipment.
The syringe.
Yes, a large 20 to 30 cc syringe. And critically, this syringe is not filled with saline or medication. It is filled entirely with room air.
Just plain air. So they use it to basically blow dry the inside of the medical scope before they even unpackage the powder.
Precisely. The doctor aggressively flushes the biopsy port with that air-filled syringe until absolutely zero fluid drops out of the end of the channel.
But that aggressive blow drying is really only step 1, right?
Right. Once the main channel is clear, the doctor begins threading the actual Hemospray catheter down into the scope. But they can't just push it in casually.
No.
As the catheter travels down toward the bleeding site, an assistant must continuously plunge that syringe, flushing the catheter itself with rapid blasts of air.
They're essentially generating a pressurized force field of dry air inside the tube.
Yes.
Just to keep the ambient humidity of the stomach from seeping into the tip.
And they have to maintain that continuous positive pressure the entire time they are navigating toward the lesion.
And here's where it gets really interesting for you listening. There is a massive psychological hurdle that comes into play right here. To keep the environment from overwhelming that tiny tube, the doctor has to completely disable the suction mechanism on their endoscope.
Which is wild.
Because normally, if a doctor is looking at a hemorrhage, their first instinct, trained into their muscle memory over thousands of procedures, is to hit the suction button to clear the pooling blood so they can actually see the source of the leak.
It goes against every instinct they have. Imagine trying to fix a complex mechanical issue under the hood of a car while someone is pouring oil over your hands.
Oh, man.
And you aren't allowed to wipe it away. Visibility is rapidly deteriorating. But if the doctor accidentally taps that suction button, the negative pressure will instantly pull ambient fluid directly into the tip of the Hemospray catheter.
And the moment that happens, the powder inside the tip instantly cross-links and forms a concrete plug.
The procedure is instantly compromised, so the endoscopist has to actively fight their own reflexes.
They must deliberately shut off their primary tool for visibility. Just let the blood pool and rely entirely on that continuous manual flush of dry air to keep the tip clear as they hover into position.
Right. Assuming they navigate that minefield perfectly, of course.
Okay, so let's say they do. The scope is dry. The catheter has advanced down the channel, shielded by a continuous blast of air. They are hovering that crucial 1 to 2 centimeters away from the mass. Suction is strictly off. Now we reach the actual deployment of the device.
Right, the firing mechanism.
Yeah.
The handle of the Hemospray unit is built around a pressurized carbon dioxide cylinder. It is a heavy-duty pneumatic delivery system. And the activation is this very deliberate multi-step sequence. The doctor first turns a knob at the base to pierce and activate the CO2 cylinder. Then they open a directional valve, which primes the pressurized gas to enter the catheter system.
And only then are they ready to actually pull the trigger. But this isn't like spraying a fire extinguisher, is it? You don't just hold the trigger down.
No, not at all. You have to remember, you're pushing a heavy, dense mineral powder through 3 feet of a headphone jack-sized tube. The physics of that delivery require a really specific firing strategy.
So what happens when you press it?
When you press the trigger for the first time, you do not get a massive blast of powder. You usually only get a very small, anemic puff.
Because the powder is still traveling from the handle.
Right.
Fighting all that dead air all the way down the length of the catheter. The system requires priming.
Exactly. The established technique is to press the trigger for a couple of seconds, just to get the powder moving through the lumen of the tube. Then you release and quickly press it again. That consecutive rapid second press is what finally unleashes the payload. The pressurized CO2 violently ejects the powder out of the tip. Typically, each full successful pull of the trigger delivers about 2 grams of the compound directly onto the bleeding site.
2 grams. And the endoscopist will use multiple cartridges, right? Sometimes up to 3, layering the powder on, pulling the trigger again and again until they visually confirm that the bleeding has stopped and the mechanical matrix has fully formed.
Yes, exactly.
But, okay, we have to address the what-if scenario. We are dealing with high-pressure gas, tiny tubes, and a remarkably hostile wet environment. What happens if, despite the blow-drying and the air force field, a tiny amount of moisture seeps in and the catheter does get plugged?
Well, if the powder turns into a solid block inside the tube, you might assume you could just hold the trigger down and use the high-pressure CO2 to blast the plug out.
Yeah, like clearing a jammed pipe. That makes sense.
It does make sense intuitively, but doing so is incredibly dangerous and strictly against protocol.
Oh,
Yeah. The pressure could build up and cause the catheter to actually rupture. Or worse, it could suddenly release a violent, uncontrolled projectile of solid powder directly into the patient's delicate tissue.
oh, wow.
So if the catheter gets plugged, it is dead. You cannot clear it.
So what's the reset protocol then? Because that sounds brutal, especially considering the patient is actively losing blood while this is happening.
It is extremely stressful. The doctor must completely withdraw the clogged catheter out of the endoscope and just throw it in the trash.
Wow.
Then they have to take their air-filled syringe and aggressively flush the endoscope's main channel all over again to completely dry out whatever residual moisture caused the failure in the first place.
Meaning you're going all the way back to step 1. Opening a brand new, sterile catheter, threading it down the scope while the assistant continuously pumps air to create a new force field, actively resisting the urge to hit the suction button all over again.
All over again.
And the clock is ticking the entire time.
The tension in the room during a reset like that is palpable. It really underscores why the initial meticulous drying setup is the single most vital phase of the entire operation.
I bet. But, okay, let's look at the success state. The setup is flawless, the firing sequence is executed perfectly, the rapid setting hydrogel wall forms over the tumor, and the monitor shows the patient's hemoglobin levels are finally stabilizing. The hemorrhage has stopped. The immediate crisis is over.
Or a huge relief.
Definitely. But we have to pivot to the reality check of this intervention. This is a massive victory, but the gastrointestinal tract's entire biological purpose is to churn, secrete acid, and wash things away. Right?
Right.
So a microscopic sandbag wall sitting on top of wet mucosa cannot possibly be a permanent fix.
No, it's not. Grounding our expectations is critical here. Hemospray is a highly effective life-saving emergency tool, but its effect is inherently temporary.
Because it relies entirely on a mechanical barrier sitting superficially on the tissue.
Exactly. So it will eventually slow off. Within about 24 to 72 hours, the natural peristalsis and mucosal secretions of the GI tract will naturally wash the inert powder away, passing it harmlessly out of the body.
Which means there is a very real documented risk of the patient rebleeding once that barrier gives way.
There is. Medical teams do not use this as the final cure. They use it as a bridge.
A bridge to what?
Well, it stabilizes a crashing patient, halting the immediate life-threatening hemorrhage. This buys the critical care team in the ICU precious hours or days to resuscitate the patient, transfuse blood, correct their abnormal coagulation or platelet levels with medication if possible, and then plan a more permanent, controlled surgical intervention.
So it essentially buying the most valuable resource in emergency medicine time.
Exactly, just buying time.
Are there specific anatomical areas where doctors absolutely cannot deploy this tool, like hard limits?
Oh, yes. There are strict anatomical boundaries. The 2 major contraindications where hemospray is completely forbidden are fistulas and perforations.
Okay, a fistula being an abnormal tunnel connecting 2 organs that shouldn't be connected, and a perforation being a complete hole that goes all the way through the wall of the stomach or the intestine.
Right. And if you think about the pneumatic delivery mechanism we just discussed, you are firing a dense powder using a high-pressure carbon dioxide cylinder.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Yeah, if you aim that at a perforation, you aren't plugging a hole, you are creating a medical catastrophe.
Because you would be blasting pressurized CO2 gas and foreign mineral powder straight through the stomach wall and out into the patient's sterile abdominal cavity.
Exactly. The introduction of high-pressure gas into the abdomen is called pneumoperitoneum, and it can literally compress the organs and cause cardiovascular collapse.
Wow.
Furthermore, blasting foreign powder into that sterile space can cause severe peritonitis, which is a massive life-threatening infection. So holes that go all the way through the tissue are a strict absolute boundary.
That makes total sense. But while there are absolute boundaries, the source material mentions clinical applications are also expanding into really interesting territory, right?
They are. Initially, there was significant hesitation in the medical community about using this pressurized system for variceal bleeding.
Varices are essentially severely enlarged, swollen veins, right? Often found in the esophagus or stomach, usually caused by advanced liver disease.
Correct. And they are under incredibly high pressure, and the vessel walls are paper thin. So when they rupture, the bleeding is catastrophic.
And the traditional intervention for that is to carefully wrap tiny rubber bands around the veins to choke off the blood supply.
Right. So the concern was that firing high-pressure gas directly at these delicate ballooning veins might just shred them further.
Makes sense. But the clinical data is shifting on that now.
It is. Endoscopists are now successfully publishing case reports where they have utilized Hemospray to treat variceal ulcer bleeding.
Wait, really?
Yeah. In situations where the veins are in locations too tricky to band or the tissues too compromised for heat, they are actually relying on this non-touch mechanical powder to safely form a seal over ruptured high-pressure veins when all the primary traditional modalities are entirely off the table.
That's incredible. So synthesizing this incredibly complex procedure for everyone listening, we are looking at a vital non-touch rescue tool. It steps in when a patient's own biological ability to clot is completely compromised.
Yeah.
It can seal massive bleeding from peptic ulcers, post-polypectomy bleeds in the colon, and even incredibly delicate variceal ruptures. But the success of this futuristic tool relies entirely on a doctor's ability to master basic physics.
Flawlessly executing a bone dry setup.
Exactly. Fighting their own muscle memory to suction blood and manipulating compressed gas to deliver a temporary physical plug that pulls a crashing patient back from the brink.
It represents a remarkable masterclass in adapting to the hostile environment of the human body, rather than simply trying to fight it with chemistry.
It really does. Well, thank you all for joining us on this deep dive into the intense, high-stakes mechanics of endoscopic interventions. I feel like it entirely reframes the tools at a modern doctor's disposal.
It's been great discussing it. And, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to mull over, one that builds on this incredible shift from complex biology to pure pragmatic physics.
I'd love to hear it.
If we can effectively stop massive internal hemorrhaging, not with complex pharmaceuticals or biological coagulants, but simply by firing an inert powder to create a temporary mechanical wall, it raises an incredible question. What other acute medical crises inside the human body could we solve purely through advanced mechanical engineering and physics rather than chemistry?